Everyone, can I welcome you to the 20th meeting in 2012 of the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee. Can I remind members of the public and committee members to turn off their mobile phones as they affect the broadcasting system? I haven't done mine. Agenda item 1 is business in private. Can I seek the agreement of the committee to take agenda items 7 and 8 in private? Thank you. Agenda item 2 is subordinate legislation. We will now take evidence from the Minister for Housing and Welfare on 3 instruments of subordinate legislation which are subject to the affirmative procedure. The first 2 of these instruments relate to the Scottish Government's 2012 homelessness commitment, on which the committee has previously carried out an inquiry. There are the Housing Support Services Homeless Scotland Regulations 2012 and the Homelessness Abolition of Priority Needs Test Order 2012. The Minister will also speak on the Rent Scotland Act 1984 Premiums Regulations 2012. I propose to deal with each of the instruments in turn. So can I welcome the new Minister of Housing and Welfare to our first outing in front of the committee, Margaret Burgess, and welcome the supporting officials, Stephen White, Head of Housing Options and Services Unit, Gordon McNichol, Divisional Solicitor, Directorate for Legal Services, Barry Stocker, Private Rented Sector Team Leader, and Jacqueline Pantoni, Legal Director at the Scottish Government. These instruments are laid under the affirmative procedure, which means Parliament must approve them before the provisions may come into force. Following the evidence session, the committee will formally consider each of the instruments under agenda items 3 to 5. Can I invite the Minister to make some introductory remarks on the first SSI, which is the Housing Support Services Homelessness Scotland Regulations 2012.
Thank you, Convener, and thank the committee members for the opportunity to speak about the draft regulations which have been laid before Parliament for approval. Section 32B of the Housing Scotland Act 1987, when commenced, will place a statutory duty on local authorities to assess the housing support needs of unintentionally homeless households to whom they have a duty. Under this duty, the local authority will need to ensure that housing support services are provided to those assessed as being in need of them. To give effect to the duty, the housing support services to which the duty applies have been prescribed in these regulations. Following a public consultation and dialogue with key stakeholders, 4 types of support services are prescribed and they've been agreed with stakeholders. The purpose of assessing and delivering these services is to enable a person to occupy or to continue to occupy residential accommodation as that person's sole or main residence. The types of support prescribed include personal budgeting, debt counselling, tenancy rights and responsibilities, and advice and assistance with settling into a new tenancy. The form and duration of housing support will vary depending on individual circumstances. The broad definition of housing support service will allow local authorities flexibility to approach the new duty using means that can be tailored to a particular individual or household, while also taking account consideration of any other local circumstances. Our consultation process revealed that most stakeholders were not in favour of prescribing very detailed regulations which would not only set out the categories of support service to be covered in regulations, but the detailed means by which a local authority should carry out its duty. Instead, the majority preference, particularly from local authorities, was for regulations setting out the relevant categories of housing support service. In addition, local authorities are supportive of commencing a dialogue on development of non-statutory guidance on the new housing support duty based on existing good practice carried out by local authorities at the moment. And we intend to develop non-statutory guidance early in 2013 in partnership with cross-sector stakeholders. Many of the housing support services are currently being provided by local authorities. The new duty and regulations should not place an onerous financial burden on them. The regulations and the duty they give effect to contribute to the Scottish Government's broader work to prevent and tackle homelessness, such as the 2012 commitment. Housing support is crucial to the livelihoods of many people in Scotland. It enables vulnerable people to maintain their tenancies, avoid repeat homelessness, and live independent, fulfilling lives in their communities. Commencing the support duty and implementing regulations will ensure that this vital support is assessed and provided for all unintentionally homeless households in Scotland. Thank you.
Okay, does any member wish to comment on this SSI? No? Okay. Minister, would you like to make the introductory remarks on the second SSI, the Homelessness Abolition of Priority Need Test Scotland Order 2012?
Okay, I will do it. Thank you. Scotland's 2012 homeless commitment to give all unintentionally homeless households the right to settle accommodation is internationally acclaimed, and Scottish homelessness legislation has rightly been referred to as the most progressive in Europe. Meeting the 2012 commitment will be an historic achievement and sends a strong signal about the type of country Scotland is, where equality of access to settled accommodation is enabled for some of our most vulnerable people. The latest published homelessness statistics released in October 2012 shows the excellent progress made by individual local authorities across Scotland towards the achievement of the 2012 target, with 93% of those assessed as homeless between April and June this year deemed to be in priority need. 18 council areas are already assessing 100% of homeless households as being in priority need. A further 7 councils, over 90%, were assessed as priority need. A key part of this is prevention of homelessness. The joint Scottish Government COSLA 2012 steering group was established in 2009. Over the past 3 years, the group and local authorities working in hub partnerships have driven forward a preventative approach to tackling homelessness, and this has led to the success of the housing options approach. And indeed, the committee's report recognised the transformational nature of housing options and the achievements of the hubs. Prevention of homelessness is working, and one indicator of this is the reduction in homeless application to local authorities over the past year. We also know that local authorities and their partners are helping many more households than the statistics show, as early intervention is preventing homelessness and helping people into other options better suited to them or keeping them in their current accommodation. The Government is committed to preventing homelessness when it can and tackling it when it can't. And over the next 3 years, at least £760 million will be invested in affordable housing supply. We also recognise that we're in difficult economic times right now and are alert to the potentially harmful effects of the welfare reforms of the UK Government. We're committed to challenging the UK Government policy where we as a Government think it's wrong. We're working with partners to mitigate the impact where we can and taking forward plans for the independence referendum in order that Scotland can make its own decisions. To conclude, we've seen a huge culture change in homelessness services in Scotland. Beyond this year, we will have a stronger legislative safety net for those that need it, together with a robust embedded focus on the prevention of homelessness. We in the Government are committed to working with our partners across all sectors to ensure that the end of 2012 is the beginning of improved outcomes for those facing homelessness in Scotland. Thank you.
Okay, any comments or questions from members? Jim, did you have one?
Yes, thank you, Convener, and good morning, Minister. You mentioned early intervention to prevent homelessness. The committee recommended in its report on its homelessness inquiry that money advice and debt counselling should be an integral part of the support offered to unintentionally homeless households. Can you explain how these regulations address these issues?
The first regulation I spoke on does address that because it's making it a statutory obligation that all unintentionally households will be given debt counselling, money advice, rights and responsibility of being a tenant, and also support in settling into a new tenancy. And I think it's also recognised that most local authorities are already doing that. I think that the preventative work and the early intervention has been recognised as one of the key priorities in reducing homelessness, and therefore we don't think that will be an onerous burden, and local authorities will work in partnership in many ways with the third sector to ensure that those services are available in their area.
Thank you.
Minister, in terms of monitoring how the abolition of priority needs test is working, you know, we did a homeless inquiry and know that most of the councils are going to meet the legislation. How is the Scottish Government going to continue to monitor it?
We continue to monitor the statistics in any case on a quarterly basis. We don't expect to see the impact of a 100% target being reached till the June figures are coming out, but we will be continually monitoring. We'll be doing it through the hubs with the interaction we have between Scottish Government officials and local authorities, because it's absolutely crucial that we don't just meet the target now, but that we continue to meet it and look at how we can address things if things are not going as we anticipate. So the monitoring is continual. We're also looking at a tool, an analytical tool for local authorities to use so that it's consistent across Scotland of how it's been done. And I think we're in the second draft of that.
Anyone else got any questions on that? Okay, Minister, can we move on to the third and final SSI, the Rent Scotland Act 1984 Premiums Regulations?
Thank you. The current position in the Rent Scotland Act 1984 currently makes it an offence to require the payment of a premium in addition to the rent and a refundable deposit for the granting, continuance and renewal of a private rented sector tenancy. A premium as currently defined includes any fine or any other like sum and any other pecuniary consideration which is over above rent and a refundable deposit. Any such charges by landlords or their agents are not permissible under this current legislation. However, evidence suggests that some tenants are currently being charged a range of premium fees, predominantly by letting agents, and that these charges are often overinflated and unjustified. And furthermore, our recent consultation on this matter highlighted that such charges prevent significant financial barriers to accessing privately rented accommodation for many people. Section 32 of the Private Rented Housing Act 2011, once commenced, will amend the definition of a premium. It provides Scottish ministers with powers to make regulations to include further permissible charges which will not be treated as premiums, including stipulating maximum fees. What the Government is doing is laying this order before Parliament to commence Section 32 of the 2011 Act on the 30th of November this year. That section will amend the definition of a premium so that it includes any fine or other sum and any other pecuniary consideration in addition to rent, and includes any service fee or administration charge. This will make clear to those letting agents and landlords who are currently charging upfront fees to tenants, many of whom believe the current definition doesn't apply, and they're asking tenants to pay these charges. This should make it absolutely clear that these charges are not permissible. The statutory instrument, the Scottish statutory instrument before the committee today is to make regulations to include further permissible charges. The draft regulations before you today provide that only payments in relation to the impending UK Government's Green Deal are to be permitted in addition to rent and a refundable deposit. The Green Deal will provide a means to carry out energy efficiency improvements in properties, the finance which will be paid back through a charge on property's electricity meter. We have prepared these regulations to ensure that we establish clarity at this early stage so as not to impede the Green Deal's potential contribution to improving the energy efficiency of private rented housing in Scotland. In summary, the draft regulations before the committee today outline that only the Green Deal will be permitted as a charge in addition to rent and a refundable deposit in the granting, continuance and renewal of a private rented tenancy, and that no other charges are permissible. I recommend the committee supports this instrument and recommends to Parliament that they should also approve it. Thank you.
Okay, any questions or comments from members on this one? No. No questions at all to officials or Minister? All right, we move on to agenda item 3. This is the formal consideration of motion S4M0704739, calling for the committee to recommend approval of the Housing Support Services Homelessness Scotland Regulations 2012. Minister, I invite you to speak or just move the motion as I detailed.
I'm pleased to ask that the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee recommends that the Housing Support Services Homelessness Scotland Regulations 2012 be approved, which will ensure that vital housing support is provided for homeless households in Scotland.
Move the motion.
I move the motion.
Any comments? Can I put the question on the motion? The question is that motion S4M04739 in the name of Margaret Burgess be approved. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. Agenda item 4 of subordinate legislation is formal consideration of motion S4M04740 calling for the committee to recommend approval of the Homelessness Abolition of Priority Need Test Scotland Order 2012. Minister, can I invite you to move the motion?
I move the motion that it be approved and would add, I think this is a historic step in the needs of homeless households in Scotland. Motion moved.
Any comments from members? Okay, I put the question that motion S4M04740 in the name of Margaret Burgess be approved. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. Thank you. Next item of subordinate legislation is consideration of motion S4M04632 calling for the committee to recommend approval of the Rent Scotland Act 1984 Premiums Regulation 2012. Minister, can I invite you to move the motion?
I formally move the motion.
Any comments from members? So the question is that motion S4M04632 in the name of Margaret Burgess be approved. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. Can I thank the Minister and her team for getting through that so quickly? Thank you very much. I'll briefly suspend the meeting to allow witnesses to leave the room. We move on to agenda item 6, which is Scottish Water's annual report and accounts 2011-12. We're now going to hear evidence from Scottish Water on its annual report and accounts, and I welcome the witnesses Ronnie Mercer, the Chairman, Douglas Millican, Interim Chief Executive, and Jeff Aikenhead, Asset Management Director from Scottish Water. Mr Mercer, would you like to make a brief opening statement?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to you and members of the committee. Thanks for the invitation to come and speak to you about what we're doing. The annual report, you'll have it, has got a number 10 in the front because it's 10 years old, and there's been pretty good progress, I hope you would agree, in the 10 years. There are now 4 businesses running in Scottish Water. There's a wholesale business, which is the water and wastewater business, the principal purpose of the job, you could say. There's Business Stream, which is a retailer for non-domestic customers. There's Scottish Water Horizons, which is a non-regulated business. And Scottish Water International, which is a consultancy doing work across the world. So Scottish Water's had a pretty good year. Profit before tax was very satisfactory, the surplus as we would call it. Cash is pretty good, CapEx the same. Operations went well. The OPAs, the overall performance assessment measures, are pretty much in line with where we wanted them to be. Control of risks turned out okay, and outputs that we got from all the work we did were fine. Forward radar for what we're doing to 2015 is to hit the upper quartile customer service targets in United Kingdom, deliver outputs from a £2.5 billion capital programme, and then continue the efficiency drive to hold the household bills down as best we can. So the idea, the strapline here is ministerial directives are all kind of on track, and they're in the report, page 8. I won't read them out. Business Stream had a pretty good year too. Its profit before tax was fine. Market share held up, they hung on to their margins. Customer service kind of moved in the right direction. And there's about 2/3 of the customers now pay less than the standard or default charge that we have. This is a competitive business. That's my strapline for Business Stream. Good news is England's opening up to retail business over the next 5 years. The kind of bad news is there's more competition tuning up here now for this coming. And we've got, I think, Thames, Veolia, United Utilities and Severn Trent, adding into the 3 that we already have, Emira, Wessex and Anglia. Horizons is pursuing a green agenda, helps to keep our energy costs down. That's one of the principal reasons for it. Principally works on renewables, in wind and hydro, a bit of waste energy as well. It's a non-regulated business, of course, and it's self-sufficient. International's made a good start. Diverse range of expertise to offer from Scottish Water International. In Canada, we've done operational training there. Republic of Ireland restructuring, similar to what Scottish Water has done over the last 10 years. They're about to start in a very similar type of exercise to go from a lot of regions to one company. Qatar, we've got a 5-year operations and maintenance management contract there. It's up and running. And in Poland, we've been looking at some asset management issues. That's got potential. In India, some finance and regulation as well. So there's things happening there. Other forward radar issues from us. Quite a lot of good apprentice stuff happening, new jobs. There's 50 apprentices and 27 more the year we're in. We've got 74 apprentice placements in capital programme and supply chain when we help to encourage people whom we give work to have apprentices. We persuade them that's a good idea. 30 new ones in the Tom Vehicle Management and GAP plant hire people, because these are long-term contracts. We've got 47 graduates, and there's 100 workplace placements per annum we do, which is helping people to go work somewhere else. So just thought I'd mention that as kind of thing that you do in the going. Forward radar on hydronation. The Water Resources Bill is there. Scottish Water's given evidence and all that, and we won't try to regurgitate what our senior colleagues have said. Today, this very day, we've launched our consultation, Shaping the Future of Your Water and Wastewater Services. And that's a 3-month exercise looking at the next 25 years. So hopefully we'll get good responses on that. And we've got a customer forum. It's up and running, chaired by Peter Peacock, formerly of this parish. And they've got a big job to help us with the next price review and this 25-year plan as well to feed in what we think we should be doing. Kind of risk we face, apart from the obvious risk list that we have of supplying good clean drinking water and taking away wastewater and so on, and finances, the kind of risks, local risks you have are severe weather. Last year we didn't have much, which was great. 2 previous years were awful, worse than 100 years for cold and so on. We have a risk of critical asset failure. Something can just happen and hit us. Cyber attack we worry about. That's a bit of a problem in some places. We've got one particular board member who's had one in his company and it was a nightmare. And leadership retention, which is crucial for us to keep leaders. So, what's our platform for success? One is to carry the staff with us. Hopefully we're doing that. We must have robust regulators. I have to tell you we've got them. The Water Industry Commission, there's some of them sitting behind me, I think. SEPA, drinking water quality people. Robust regulators and supportive government are a helpful combination to force us along the road that we should go. We try always to be a business. We need access to capital. We only kind of fund about 90% of our operations and capital in particular. And we want to have a demanding Scottish Water Board, which is the non-executives. We want them to be demanding on these executives, so I am demanding on them, is the idea, with my colleagues. And finally, Scottish Water's won quite a few awards this year. I won't go over them all, but they've had safety, communications, personnel, purchasing. Purchasing was a gold award, the only water company ever to win one from the Chartered Institute of Purchasing, which is very good, and business skills. But I just wanted to highlight that there's an annual awards in the country that takes place in London in December, and it's a huge event, like, I don't know, 1,200 people go, and there's all sorts of categories. And there's a Utility of the Year, and there's a short list of 3 in Utility of the Year. You can't apply to be in the short list for Utility of the Year. And both Scottish Water and Business Stream are 2 of the 3. The third one is an electricity company who is hopefully putting up the prices as we speak. Who would have thought that a few years ago, that you would land with these 2 companies here? Now, we might not win, and if we don't, we don't, but I'm really pleased to say that we've been put on that by somebody else. I don't even know who it is, but well done to both the fellows here and the Business Stream folk to have got there. So, that's my opening statement. Thanks very much. Very happy to take any questions you have or any points you want to make.
Thank you very much, and that certainly seems good news as well, and good luck at that award ceremony. Can I kick off by asking you, your annual report indicates that the average household's customer's bill will remain at £324 during this financial year. How long do you think Scottish Water can continue to hold the average household bill at this level and maintain the required investment in the network?
Okay, I'm going to ask, there's a plan to raise it for the next 2 years by roughly inflation. But Douglas, would you just like to say what our agreement is with our owners?
No, indeed. Thank you. In coming into this regulatory period, the agreement that we reached with the Water Industry Commission was that household prices would fall by 5% below inflation over the 5 years. And really due to a number of circumstances, but including our continued drive for performance improvement and efficiency, we're in a position where we actually think that household prices will fall by something between 9 and 10% over this period. So really giving 5% back to customers beyond what was agreed at the start. And the way we've done that is by keeping household prices frozen for longer than was originally envisaged. Because they've been frozen for 4 years now, we are in a position where for the next 2 years, we expect we will need to raise them in line with inflation, just to make sure that the business can continue to be financially sustainable. But beyond that, there is a big question in terms of the future path for prices. And in this consultation that Ronnie referred to that we're launching today, one of the questions that we're posing to customers is what is the balance that they want between the future rate of service improvements and the future path for prices, because there are some choices that are available, and we really want to hear from our customers and stakeholders about their views for the future.
Yeah, Malcolm?
That was very helpful, because some of us were a bit puzzled about the below inflation requirement and what you're proposing for the next 2 years. So could you just clarify what was the 5-year period where you had to keep it 5% below, and when does that end, sort of thing? That
was from April 2010 through to March 2015. And effectively what we've done over the past 3 to 4 years is we've kept prices frozen at a time when, I guess, on a cumulative basis, inflation has probably risen by something, over 10%.
Right. So by increasing them by inflation for the next 2 years, you'll hit your target exactly by 2015, is that
No, well, in fact, our prices will be 4 to 5% lower than we'd agreed with the regulator at the start of the period. That would be effectively what we've done. Traditionally what we would do is we would perform in line with or better than a determination over a 5-year period, and at the end, if there's financial outperformance, that would then be given back to customers in the form of lower charges in the following 5 years. Effectively, what we've done this time, recognising the tough economic circumstances that we're in, is we've given that outperformance back to customers early.
Give us an idea how that compares with other water companies in the rest of the UK.
Well, if you look at the journey that Scottish Water has gone on over the past 10 years, I think 10 years ago, our charges were about the 4th highest in the UK. They're effectively, there are 10 large water companies in England and Wales. We make it 11. So those 11, I think we were about the 4th highest 10 years ago. Our charges are now the lowest in the whole of the UK and £52 a year below the average in England and Wales.
Okay, Adam?
That's excellent. But can I ask some questions on...
No, okay, right.
I'd like to ask some questions on financial performance, if you don't mind. Firstly, the Scottish Minister set the maximum net new borrowing limit for Scottish Water at £50 million for 2011-12, which Scottish Water fully exploited. What impact did the limit being set at a lower level than in previous years have on your investment programme?
The short answer is absolutely none, but I'll go on to explain why. If I come back to this concept of the 5-year regulatory period, the determination that's agreed between the Commission and us, but absolutely involving ministers, is about what the objectives are that we've got to deliver, what the revenue will receive from customers, and that's in the form of the agreed price limit, and also the amount of borrowing that will be made available over that 5-year period. And it is about a sum of borrowing over that 5-year period. Now, as we've gone on, that sum of borrowing has changed, but it has absolutely been in agreement with us, and we have maintained absolutely our intended progress with delivering our capital programme. In fact, we're doing better than that because we're delivering broadly the level of investment that we expected each year, or slightly less, but in terms of cash, but actually in terms of the benefits for customers, what we call the outputs, we're delivering those faster than we originally agreed to do.
And in terms of your surplus before tax, that fell between 2010-11 and 11-12 from 146.2 million to 107 million. Can you explain the reasons behind this fall and whether you expect another fall in surplus this year?
Okay. At the headline level, the reason why our surplus fell was because we've held prices frozen at a time when a number of our costs are rising in line with inflation. Just digging a little bit more deeply into that, there were 3 principal reasons for the £39 million reduction in surplus. The first of which was because our costs rose by 14 million. Now, when I say our costs have risen, if you look at it on a like-for-like basis, excluding the effect of inflation, in Scottish Water, the regulated business, our operating efficiency improved by about 3.8%. But in nominal terms, when you take into account the effect of inflation, they were up by 14 million. The charges we pay to our PFI companies, and PFI companies do about 45% of our wastewater treatment, they tend to be index linked, so linked to inflation. So they rose by 8 million. And our depreciation charges rose by 15 million. And that's really just as a function, as the years go by, we're adding more assets into our asset base. So a good example of that in the past year is the Glencorse water treatment works that I know a number of you have visited outside Edinburgh. That came into supply within the past year, and therefore that has now been depreciated, whereas previously that was not there to be depreciated. So those have been the reasons this year. Looking ahead into the 2012-13 year, we will expect our surplus to fall again. And again, the reason for that is because household prices have been frozen coming into this year. And that's one of the reasons why we cannot keep freezing prices indefinitely. We need to return to trajectory, where in broad terms, prices rise broadly in line with inflation over the longer term to maintain the financial strength of the company.
So what you're saying is your cost increases have outstripped your revenue increases, if you like, and that's likely to continue while you're holding your prices constant.
Absolutely, because our total revenue increase across the whole group last year was only £1.6 million, so about 0.1%, simply because of the effect of the price freeze.
Can I ask about Scottish Water Horizons? What happens to the surplus with Scottish Water Horizons?
Horizons is very much in an investment and growth phase. And what we're seeking to do, and we're encouraged by the provisions in the Water Resources Bill encouraging us to do more of this, is to look for sensible commercial opportunities about where we can exploit our asset base to generate further renewable energy. So at the moment, any profits that are being generated in Horizons are being fully reinvested in the growth of that business.
The final question I have to ask is about your level of debt, which is in excess of £3 billion. Could I ask how this compares with other water companies of a similar size to yourself? And how do you intend to manage your debts in the future?
At a headline level, the broad level of debt that we have in relation to the size of our business or our asset stock is absolutely in line with many water companies and less than some. In terms of managing the debt, the key issue from a customer perspective is the impact on our interest bill and how that feeds through into customer prices. So one of the key things that we do is that we make sure that when we take loans out, we take them for a very long period of time and fixed interest rates, so that we minimise the amount of that debt that is coming up for renewal in any particular year. Because clearly, if we got into a very different interest rate environment to where we are now, let's say interest rates were up at 10%, then it could be a big shock to the company if suddenly a big chunk of that debt came up for renewal in a particular year. So we try to make sure that typically no more than £100 million a year of our debt comes up for renewal in any particular year. So if there ever is an adverse interest rate impact, it is minimised. The good news at the moment, however, is that because of the very benign interest rate environment, is that our interest costs are on a downward trend.
Very much.
Ravina, can I ask a quick supplementary?
Yes.
Good morning, gentlemen. I just wanted to ask the surpluses that you mentioned under Scottish Water and Business Stream are quite significant. Just be interested to know the extent to which these are being reinvested for the benefit of the business and the customers that you serve, which, because obviously you don't have the pressure that companies south of the border have in terms of meeting shareholder the demands of shareholders. So I'd just be interested in knowing a little bit more about that.
Sure. The Business Stream has made, I think, 30 whatever million there, and we tend to have a dividend going back to its parent company, which is Scottish Water. We retain some money in the business. They compete for any capital spend with the other parts of Scottish Water. They have not asked for anything yet that we haven't done, which has mainly been investment in IT, for example, and investment in preparing for the English market opening up, which is due to open over a period of 5 years. And that's, again, quite a lot of data-type stuff and so on. We've got people working from England, but we don't have offices there. Currently, they work from home. That might change in years going forward, and when the English market opens completely, we may well spend money on other things, which currently is there to do that. So there's nothing they've been denied or come up to ask at this stage. And they try to raise their customer service as they go along at the moment with some of the spend we have already. So that's a kind of balance of a dividend going back and keeping enough to do what they need to do. And if they wanted to do anything big, they would come along and say, and we consider whether or not we would go with that.
So there's real advantages in having the model of ownership that we have in Scotland.
Well, I think it's working pretty well, actually, because we kind of compete with the private companies in terms of efficiency, and we've heard that. At the same time, we've got a supportive owner. You've always got an owner of some sort, let me tell you. Even to be a private, you've got an owner with different issues, and we've got a supportive owner. So we're happy with the way it's working right now, and it's letting us put the money where it should go, I would suggest. There's been some poor publicity in the last few days. I can see where your questioning is coming from, reading the press yesterday and whatnot of where the money might go. But obviously we don't have that.
Alex?
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to move on to performance against targets. And I noticed that the Water Industry Commission set an overall performance assessment score target of 317 for 2011-12. And Scottish Water scored 355, which was 85% of the maximum available. Can you tell me how Scottish Water's OPA score compares with that of English water companies?
You can do that.
That's fine. The OPA was a measure introduced in England back in the 1990s to really encourage the water companies to improve their performance. By the latter part of the last decade, the view that was taken by the regulator in England and Wales was that OPA had largely served its purpose in England and Wales. Most of the companies were performing at a broadly comparable level. And therefore, OPA itself is no longer being formally run in England and Wales. I think that's quite an important starting point. Nonetheless, what we've done is look at our performance, in particular relative to the leading companies in England and Wales, because the target that we agreed to coming into this regulatory period, that by the time we get to the end of this period, in the sort of 2014-2015 period, our performance should be as good as the leaders, the leading three companies or so in England and Wales, which traditionally, their scores can vary a bit from year to year or have varied, but typically is in the range of about 380 to 400 points. And that's why the target that we have accepted for this period is that by next year, in fact by 2013-14, our OPA performance should be at 380 or better.
What do you have to do to achieve that?
There's a number of different areas of improvement that are required. If I look at some of the areas of our biggest improvement over the past year, it's been particularly in relation to environmental pollution incidents, where we've done significant work to understand the root cause of those problems and make changes in the way that we deal with issues. And we've driven really effectively a halving of our performance, or nearly a halving of the problems in that particular area. Looking out to the end of the period, the single biggest challenge that we have is in the way that water quality is measured. And there's a particular function of the way that water quality is measured from an OPA angle that is particularly demanding in the Scottish context because we have so many different supply zones, so that there are some operational improvements to be made, but there's some investment we need to make in particular zones to help us close those remaining OPA points.
It's also important to add, Alex, that you can slide back from that 355 as well. I mean, if you have massive plant failure somewhere, you can come away from it. It's not a guarantee forever. We hope it is, but it's not necessarily that.
Yeah. Moving on to a different target. Mr. Mercer mentioned in his opening remarks the whole process of making progress against ministerial targets over time. So can I ask you if there's anything else you can tell us about the progress that you're making against ministerial targets for 2015?
In terms of the commitment that we've given to hit all of the outputs as defined by quality regulators and built into the ministerial objectives, we're currently forecasting to hit or exceed all of the Minister's requirements by the end of the regulatory period. Always accepting that at the margins there may be some minor changes to those in conversation or discussion with the quality regulators. And out of the whole investment programme, there will inevitably be one or two projects that will hit issues and overrun beyond March 15, but they will be completed. So we're currently forecasting to deliver all of the ministerial objectives.
Thank you. The final area of performance or targets that I'd like to address is the issue of complaints. Now, it's clear that the level of complaints have fallen by 11% since 2010-11. So how many complaints did Scottish Water receive in 2011-12, and how many were satisfactorily resolved?
There's if we try and position the overall sort of the customer contact levels and complaint levels, the total volume of calls that we received from customers fell by 20% last year, which I think is a good early indicator of the fact that we're getting much better at resolving issues. So customers have fewer reasons to need to call us. In terms of telephone complaints, specifically, they were down by 5%, and written complaints were down by 11%. That's just in 1 year. I think if we look at this over a longer term period, we're on about a 40% reduction in complaints over the past 4 years, and we're pretty hopeful that by the end of this year, that'll be about a 50% reduction over 5 years.
Do you have a figure for the number of complaints that actually went the whole way and into the hands of the Scottish Public Service Ombudsman? Yeah,
we do, and it's very small. I think there were 44 complaints in 2011-12. That's the figure that I've got, 44 complaints.
To the Ombudsman?
Yes.
And how does that compare with previous years?
Much lower. I mean, I think if we look at the ministerial target that was set for this particular period, which was based on what had previously been dealt with by the former Water Watch, I think the target there was around 121 was if you like the base target. So we're down at nearly a third of that.
Mm-hmm. That's an impressive performance when you look at the figures year on year. Do you still have plans to continue to force down these figures in future?
No, absolutely. I mean, our whole philosophy as a business is we want customers to be absolutely the heart of what we're about. So there's a number of different measures that we're taking to looking at the extent to which we are meeting our customers' expectations. So the overall performance assessment is one measure, particularly around the physical aspects of service. Another key area that we're focusing on is what we call our customer experience score. So we actually look at those customers that have had reason to deal with us to get feedback on how satisfied were they in their dealings with Scottish Water. And we use that data not just to look at our performance, to see our performance is improving, not just in aggregate by each component area of service, but we use feedback to understand what's the root cause of problems. And then we drive process changes or change the way of our staff working to address the root cause of issues. So, for example, a particular one that we focused on in the past year that has had a real win-win of driving up service and reducing cost is about how we deal with issues first time, and we try and stop having to deal with repeat issues. So we've had a big success, for example, in sewer blockages and chokes about trying to avoid repeat chokes, which is, as I say, is win-win, driving up service and taking costs out of the company.
Thank you.
Are you able to divide out how many of the complaints are in relation to business stream within the complaints?
All the data that I've got here and that I've quoted relates to the contacts into Scottish Water. So that could either be from household customers to do with any aspect of service, or from any of the licence providers, so business stream or indeed their competitors, to do with the physical aspects of service to the customers of those licence providers.
Just quote you, business stream customer satisfaction here has increased by 26% in 3 years, and customer complaints have decreased by 50% since 2009.
Customer complaints have increased?
Yeah, decreased by 50% since in that time. No need for complacency, though, because we can get them. But that's the statistics are moving in the right direction. We've still got more than we'd want, but that's where we are. Business stream.
Okay, thanks. Margaret?
Moving on to climate change and sustainable development, I've got a few questions I'd like to ask you. First one is, has Scottish Water reduced the greenhouse gas emissions during 2011-12? And if so, how it intends to further reduce emissions in the coming years?
There have been, as the committee are aware, a lot of upward pressures on our carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions because of the investment that we've been making and the additional treatment that we've introduced, particularly treatment of wastewater around the coastal communities in Scotland over the last few years. But I'm pleased to say that between 10-11 and 11-12 we did manage to reduce our energy consumption. We are doing a lot of work in terms of understanding our carbon footprint. We currently have an operational footprint of 450,000 tonnes of carbon, and we've got plans in place to mitigate that particularly through the use of renewable energy. We're also doing some work to understand the carbon impact of our investment programme in common with other water companies across the UK. And looking at work that is being done elsewhere in terms of understanding how we might make reductions in that embodied carbon that comes into the business through the investment programme as well.
Thank you. And another question I'd like to ask is, what is Scottish Water doing to encourage customers to use water efficiently?
Actually doing a lot on that front, and if you look at the Scottish Water website, you'll find our latest contribution to that debate, which is 3 very useful videos that set out ways in which customers can use water wisely and make a contribution to that water efficiency agenda. We promote water efficiency, first of all, by reducing our own wastage. Some years ago, we would have been perhaps reluctant to ask customers to do a lot when we had a serious leakage problem in Scotland, but we're now on top of that and operating at almost at the economic level of leakage, and we think we'll be there by the end of this year. So we're now much more proactive in encouraging customers to use water wisely. A lot of campaigning going on and trials going on, one of them targeted at the social housing sector, and one working with the construction, the building sector, to try to get water efficient fixtures and fittings into houses. So in addition to the 3 water efficiency videos that I've mentioned, we've got messages in our household charges leaflet that goes out once a year with building information. And we are introducing shortly onto our website a calculator that customers can use to look at their household water usage and the associated energy use, because we think that one of the routes into encouraging water efficiency is to help people understand the energy use that goes with water use, and particularly the heating of water. So there's a lot of information out there, a lot of effort going in now to encouraging people to take a look at their water efficiency. And we are now upping our profile in this regard. We've got a campaign coming up with B&Q, where we'll have a presence in 32 B&Q stores across Scotland, promoting the efficient use of water and the things that customers can do.
So that's good. And lastly, Scottish Water, the infrastructure, leaked 1,132 million litres of water a day, a reduction of around 70 million litres a day from 2010-11. What is Scottish Water doing to further reduce the leakage?
A lot of the further reduction revolves around 2 things. Firstly, having the water distribution network locked down in small areas so that we can look at how each small area performs and target our efforts on leakage reduction. And we're more and more deploying technology to locate leaks that cannot be seen. We've gone, I think, through the phase where it was all about visible leakage and responding particularly to customer calls about leakage that was running in the streets, to now looking for the invisible leakage. And we use some quite sophisticated technology to find leaks in our network and fix them. In terms of numbers, we're now getting very close to the economic level of leakage, which has been calculated at 600 megalitres per day. And that's coming down from over 1,100 when we started this journey.
You mentioned the 600. How long will it take you to actually reach that level? Or are you working towards
We've given a commitment to be there by March 14. We are on the cusp of actually doing it by the end of this year. We have a fighting chance of doing it 1 year early.
That's fine, thank you very much.
I chaired a round table of Waterwise in here yesterday, and I think the chair of Waterwise thinks that while there's a price on water, we don't have a value on it, and he thought a value could only be put on it if we had water metering. What's your view on that?
It's quite interesting when you look at the evidence from across the developed world in terms of the water consumption and the instance of metering. There does not seem to be any clear correlation at all between the evidence of customers being metered and customers therefore using less water. I think that'd be the sort of the global position on it. Our belief is that there are many advantages for customers in the charging arrangements that we have in Scotland linked to council tax band. It probably provides one of the strongest levels of affordability protection for more vulnerable customers that exists in the UK. If we were to go down the metering route, one of the consequences, it would add very significantly to the average cost of supplying services to customers. At our average bill of £324 a year, using figures from Ofwat, one could expect that the average bill would rise by £50 a year just for the cost of installing and maintaining metering infrastructure and reading meters and then issuing meter bills and dealing with all the queries that come from it. So actually, we have a significant cost advantage by the fact that we don't have a meter charging approach. However, what we clearly therefore need to do is to make sure that customers are aware of all the opportunities that are available to them to save water. And it's something that we've been wrestling with stakeholders and other industry experts. And as Jeff you covered, one of the key routes that we see into this is just highlighting to customers the amount of money that they spend on heating water in the home. Using data that we've received from the Energy Saving Trust, it appears as though about a quarter of household customers' energy bills is associated with heating water. So actually the most powerful incentive that customers have to save water would not come through metering for water, but is increasing the awareness about the costs that they pay for heating water in the homes. And that's why we're so committed to the whole range of different measures for promoting water efficiency in the homes.
So that's very helpful. Gordon.
Thanks, Convener. I want to move on to the subject of road reinstatement following Scottish Water carrying out repairs or improvements to its network. The Scottish Roadworks Commissioner's annual report of 2011-12 stated that in 2010-11 Scottish Water failed to achieve the 80% target set for the quality of its roadworks reinstatement, and that Scottish Water was fined £38,000 by the Commissioner for continued poor quality roadworks. What has Scottish Water done to improve the quality of reinstatements since the fine was imposed, bearing in mind your operating surplus of £107 million?
This is an issue we take very seriously because we really do understand the impact that poor quality road reinstatement has on people moving around in Scotland. To put it into context, we carried out over 30,000 permanent reinstatements in 2011-12, and between April and October this year, a further 18,000 reinstatements have been completed. So it's a big job. We recognise that we were underperforming, even though we were on an improving trend from 2003 up to 10-11, but still underperforming in 2010-11. What we've done since then is within the operational part of the business, where reinstatements are carried out following repair work, we've instigated what we call a Reinstatement Quality Board within the business. That's about sharing best practice between the various subcontractors who work with us on reinstatement. We review all of our own coring results to make sure we've got root cause analysis on any failures. We review contractors' performance and presentations on actions from them, and outputs from both our own crews and contractors are audited. So we've got an audit function going on now. We don't wait for the official coring programme to tell us how we're doing. We're doing our own coring and our own audit of performance. And we are insisting on the sharing of best practice within the supply chain. Now, there are two aspects to reinstatement for us. One is that operational repair, and the other is the capital programme, where we're out there renewing water mains and sewers. On the internal repair service, our results for reinstatement completed in August of this year, just as an example, showed a 95.6% compliance rate and a year-to-date compliance rate of 92% on the operational side of the business. And on the capital programme side of the business, we have 4 main contractors regionally placed around the country. We've got a big focus with them in improving their performance. All of them are now consistently over 90%, and in fact the most recent figures that I have from August, one of them was at 97% and the other 3 were at 100% compliance with the quality of cores taken from their work. So a big focus on this, a lot of improvement coming through, and I'm very optimistic that by the time we get to the next formal coring programme by the Commission, that we'll be in a much better place.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Jim?
Thank you, Convener. Can I ask about the next 5-year regulatory period post-2015? Can you outline the preparatory work that Scottish Water is currently undertaking with regard to that period, and give us a flavour of the timetable for future work? So, when can we see the draft determination on the level of Scottish Water charges? What's the timetable for the consultation and the time scale for the final determination on charges which will apply during the next regulatory control period?
Okay, thank you. The whole process is necessarily very long and relatively complex because of the significance of what we're dealing with. And in fact, even before we had started in this regulatory period, the Water Industry Commission started their thinking around how did the regulatory regime need to evolve. So we started off in discussion with them and really looked at where do things need to be made better. And one of the key things that we came up with was how do we get customers much more at the heart of the price review process? How do we make sure that the improvements that we're making are really the things that customers want and customers value in Scotland? And that's what gave rise to the creation of the Customer Forum that Ronnie referred to earlier. It came into being a year ago. So we've been meeting, for example, with the Customer Forum over the past year, looking at what are some of the issues and priorities for customers. So we've done quite extensive research with customers over the past year, trying to get an understanding of their priorities. And one of the things that we're testing during this 3-month consultation period that we referred to is, have we got the right grasp on what matters to customers, or is there a different take that customers want to give? So that's one aspect. So we've got these draft strategic projections launched today. The consultation closes in mid-February. And what we will then do is that we will then work to update this document for formal publication 11 months from now, in October 2013. And that, once finalised, will set out the best understanding we can have of what are some of the opportunities and challenges that we face as an industry. So, for example, demographic changes, climate change, future legislation, etc. And what do we think we need to do differently to best meet those opportunities and challenges over the very long term, let's say the next 25 years or so. Into that, having then established that long-term context, very much based on feedback from customers and stakeholders, we will then position our business plan for the 5-year period from 2015 to 20 in that longer-term context. That again will be issued in October next year. And we then will go through a process between then and probably spring 2014 to debate that business plan in part with our stakeholders, but particularly with the Customer Forum, to make sure that that business plan reflects what it is that's important to customers. And our hope is that by April 2014 that we have agreed our business plan with the Customer Forum. And when I talk about agreeing our business plan, that is really quite an iterative process. So even over the next 12 months, we will be discussing various elements of our business plan with the Customer Forum, so that what we publish in October next year is not just the Scottish Water view, but is a view that has developed and evolved in conjunction with the Customer Forum. As an example of this way of working, Ronnie showed you earlier the larger document in terms of the consultations on our projections. There's also a much smaller customer-friendly version that's being launched today. And at the very back of that, there's a graphic showing the key service improvements and 10 questions that we're asking customers. Those questions have been very much wrestled with between us and the forum. So that's what I talk about in terms of the joint working to land, in this case, projections in a year's time, the business plan. So coming back to 2014, hopefully by April 2014, we've got an agreed business plan. And if we have an agreed business plan, then our expectation is that that will then be reflected by the Water Industry Commission in its draft determination in June 2014.
Okay, and the process, sorry, that's a very full answer about what is clearly an extensive process. So that's the beginning of that process. what's the end point for it?
So that draft determination will then be open for consultation over summer 2014, and crucially in that period, ministers need to confirm their objectives and issue the direction for the next investment period, confirm the principles of charging, and confirm the borrowing that will be made available. And then the timetable is that then is all reflected in the final determination of charges that the Commission will issue in November 2014, which hopefully is one that we will then be able to agree. Clearly, there is an alternative option if we don't, but hopefully we'll be able to agree that. And then we will then reflect that in a delivery plan for the following period that we'll put to ministers in February 2015. And then by April 2015, at the start of the new period, we're off and running.
Very clear, thank you for that. And as you move towards the development of the business plan, what are your own thoughts in terms of what the key challenges are facing Scottish Water during the next regulatory period?
There are a number that are kind of at the strategic and down to the slightly more tactical. At the more strategic end, then absolutely we need to be alert to what is happening on issues around climate change, on issues around population growth. We need to look at what opportunities there are from innovation. Many people think that the water industry is a sector where technology changes relatively slowly, but it's fascinating just to look at how different the operation of a water company in 2012 is compared to even 20 years ago. So we'll be looking at how can we harness new innovation and new technology to drive performance improvement and to take cost out there around the company. So we'll have a continued focus on efficiency. We'll be looking at those areas where our service is not as good as it could be, as to how we make service improvements. So in our view, making progress on issues like the impact of external sewer flooding is going to be a key area for improvement into the next period. We're expecting that we will face a rising demand just for the maintenance and renewal of our existing asset base. Really, over the last 15 to 20 years, we've invested very, very significantly in new modern plant and water treatment plants and wastewater plants. A number of those plants will start to need kind of first-time refurbishment of mechanical and electrical kit in the next period. So that will drive a rising demand for capital maintenance. But in all of this, our aim will be to make sure that we minimise the impact on customers from a charging perspective. So we've set our aspiration over the long term is that in real terms, the customers' prices should not need to rise, that they should move broadly in line with inflation. In terms of the specifics of what will need to happen in 15 to 20, we've still got a bit more work to do before we can nail that completely.
I'll be interested to read the exact wording of what you've just said. I think the aspiration and ambition is to minimise the burden on the customer in terms of keeping prices as low as possible. I was interested that in extolling the virtues of Scottish Water over the last period, you were keen to emphasise that prices had been frozen, costs were rising, but investment had been sustained, and that seems like a pretty good record. You also said that you were, as part of the consultation, wanting to gauge the views of the customer on where they thought the balance should be between investment and keeping prices at as low a level as possible. So, just in conclusion, can you just tell us how you see, without preempting the process that you're engaged in, how you would see the balance between pricing and investment?
It's interesting, Jim. We tend to sometimes show a little three-legged stool diagram. I see it's not in that there, but the three-legged stool says there's the bill, there's the capital expenditure programme that Jeff carries out, and there's the borrowings. And these three things cannot move individually without an effect on the other two. So you have your three-legged stool: bill, borrowings, capital expenditure. And really what we're asking people is, how do you want this stool to move? And this will get you, this is just a little leaflet, but it's great. It's got 6 kind of headings in it of the things that we have to consider going forward: climate change, demographics, where the population be, legislation, resource availability. How much water we've got? You might say in Scotland you think you've got a lot. the environment for politics and regulation, and science and technology. So it really is a question of where do the customers see this balance? Because you can't really do anything for nothing. You can be very efficient, but you ultimately have to pay for what you're building. So that's what we hope to gain out of this consultation, and we hope to tell next year, you say October, roughly where we're getting to with it. And meanwhile, we could get the committee just a leaflet, easy read, you know, with a little thing here that tells you what we're asking them to advise us on and what Peter Peacock and these people are going to advise us on as well, as to where that three-legged stool balance is moving and what people really want.
So, I mean, you know, as for instance, on this whole issue of the trade-off between service and price, what we put forward as a kind of a central proposition for discussion is about a rate of service improvement we believe we can make. This is over the very long term, supported by prices that move broadly in line with inflation. But what we're asking customers is kind of, what's your preference on a spectrum that at one end is saying, well, no further service improvements, but prices over the long term rise by less than inflation, through to the other end of the spectrum, delivering service improvements faster than we're proposing, but maybe with prices that need to rise by a wee bit above inflation. Or where in that spectrum, customers, would you like to be? And that's what we want to hear.
How difficult is it going to be to have prices rise with inflation in order to meet your investment challenges if the response from customers is that they want to have prices frozen and not to rise?
Well, I think, you know, given that this is a 25-year time horizon, it would not be credible, it would be misleading customers to suggest that prices could be frozen in nominal terms over that length of time. So I think we owe it to our customers to be fair to them to say, look, the
control period.
Right. Well, what we're trying to do at this stage is trying to get the feedback from customers on the long-term direction for the industry. I think even over the 5-year period, if we were to freeze prices right through to 2020, we'd be a company that almost certainly would be in a loss-making position. We would not be leaving Scottish Water on a financially sustainable footing, and that would not be the right thing to do.
Okay, we'll leave it there.
Anyone else got any further questions? No. Well, can I thank you, gentlemen, for your evidence today. Can I thank you, Mr Mercer, for the extra work you've undertaken following the sad death of Chief Executive, and obviously other senior management have stepped up to the plate. So thank you very much, and we wish you success in the future. Just suspend briefly to allow the next set of witnesses to take their places. We can resume our meeting. We will now continue to hear evidence related to Scottish Water's annual report and accounts from the Water Industry Commission for Scotland. And so can I welcome the witnesses, Alan Sutherland, Chief Executive, and John Simpson, Director of Analysis of WICS. I'll start with questioning, and Malcolm, you're going to start off this section.
See, I'm mainly going to ask about the next control period, but if I can ask one question about the current control period. Obviously, I think you've heard what Scottish Water said, but do you believe that Scottish Water is on track to meet the ministerial objectives set for the 2010 to 2015 control period?
On track. They appear to have stepped up quite well despite some additional challenges. I was waiting for them to tell you about the rateable value shock that they'd had and the extra costs they'd had to incur because of that. But they seem to be sufficiently confident in their ability to deliver what they were being asked to do that they don't even need to mention that anymore. So I regard that as a further reinforcement of their own confidence. So no, they've done a very good job.
Okay, if I can mainly ask about the next control period, could you outline how WICS is taking forward work on that coming control period?
Douglas explained to you in some detail what's happening in terms of the dialogue, and he explained the importance that I think we and Scottish Water agreed of getting customers much more involved in establishing what the reasonable meant. A statutory test is we have to set charges that are at the lowest reasonable overall cost of delivering ministers' objectives. Now, as a group of people who do analysis of costs, we're quite confident that we can get to lowest cost and understand what that is within a certain boundaries. But exactly how you want to position the answer and the small trade-offs that need making between a bit of extra customer benefit, a bit less risk of customer services, and an extra 0.1% or a couple of tenths of a percent off prices. That's something actually customers are rather better qualified to make that trade-off than we'd say we are. So that's why we wanted to get customers so involved. So to add to what Douglas said, what we have been doing over the last several weeks and months is giving a lot of thought to the key factors which ultimately determine what charges will be in the next period. So things like financial strength, things like the level of customer service that we would expect. And we are setting out and publishing a series of quite simple guidance notes that Scottish Water sees and the forum sees to facilitate their discussions, and then in effect to get the forum in a position where it can have a good solid debate with Scottish Water about what the issues are, what the realms of the possible are. So that's what's going on at the moment. And once we then get the business plans from Scottish Water, we will go through them and we will again publish a series of short briefing notes. Here are the things that we agree with, here are the things we think are subject to more question, and again to encourage that debate between Scottish Water and the forum. And hopefully by going through that process we make the price review very much more transparent, so people understand who want to read about the process. They will understand why the answer at the end, why the agreement at the end is what it is between the forum and Scottish Water. And they would also understand what, if there were to be an agreement, what the Commission's determination would likely to be, because all of these guidance notes will have been published, and all of those are the things that materially impact charges at the end of the day.
It's really good that so much emphasis is being given to the views of customers. I mean, I'm just wondering, though, in terms of what you described in the legislation as ministerial objectives and achieving those at the lowest possible cost, I mean, is there anything in the legislation about all that involvement with customers, and does that actually make the process, I mean, I support it fully, but in a kind of way, it kind of makes it less clear exactly how it seems it makes the process far more complicated, although also far more desirable, obviously.
There's nothing specifically about the customer forum in legislation. It's not a statutory body. It's something that has been co-sponsored by us, Scottish Water, and Consumer Focus Scotland. It comprises representatives from the retailers that are buying wholesale services from Scottish Water, ordinary citizens, and a representative from the Scottish Council of Development and Industry, chaired by Peter Peacock. In terms of what does statute say? Well, statute says we've got to take account of the needs of rural customers, future customers. So, in essence, there is a sort of understanding, I suppose, in statute that we would cast our net quite widely in trying to understand what the issues were. But it doesn't specify exactly how we would do it.
Okay, so what do you see as the key challenges facing the Scottish water industry in the next control period?
Probably threefold. The first and one of the motivating factors for us in doing this was to try to encourage Scottish Water to focus less on what we said we wanted as the regulator, and to think more about what is it their customers expect from them. So there was that was sort of one part of the dynamic. It's quite easy to, and historically, some of you no doubt remember comments about, well, we can't solve this constraint, or we can't build this because the regulator's not giving us any money to do it. Well, what we're trying to do is get away from that and get into a position where Scottish Water has to sort of proactively explain to its customers what it needs money for, so that all of us as charge payers feel better about paying our bill. It all feels more legitimate. So that's to me an important challenge, and I think they've come a long way in this period. And I think the fact that they've foregone price rises in this period, rather than waiting for us to take the money away from them at the end of the period, that's a positive sign of that sort of culture change happening within the organisation. So, it's not completely there yet, but I think we're getting there in a good way. I think the second challenge that I would identify for you is really thinking very hard about how we deliver better outcomes for the environment and for the consumer in the industry. Historically, this has been an industry for the last 20 plus years where solutions have all been about committing new capital expenditure. And there are carbon reasons, both of the embedded carbon of building the civil engineering structure, but also in terms of operating it going forward, as to why that might not always be the best of solutions. There are alternative ways of working with the farming community or landowners, or in urban areas with councils and others, that may avoid some of that capital investment. Now, some of those solutions need to be being pursued quite assiduously, because that is potentially not just much more environmentally friendly and much lower in carbon, but also potentially a lot cheaper as a solution. But engineering, the culture in a water business is typically one of designing, building and operating assets. Right? They are typically civil engineers. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not decrying that in any way, shape or form. All I'm saying is that that's the way that they typically solve problems. And sometimes that's not necessarily going to be the best way of solving the problem. So that, I think, is sort of challenge number two. Challenge number three, I think, is continuing, I think, to build on some of the very good work that's been being done in the retail market with non-households. This is more the business stream area, and the area where Scottish Water has to compete directly with other suppliers. There is a growing expectation from businesses that what they want is much more help in managing their water resource. Historically, the water industry delivered water almost always of very good quality to a point at the boundary of the customer site. But nothing was then done, apart from collect any wastewater that was being discharged. Many of these customers actually would prefer to have help in terms of how they manage the water on their site. Many of them have their own networks of pipes and industrial sites and the like, which also have leakage problems and could benefit from expertise that the industry can bring to bear, because the industry is more expert in doing that than the people operating the site often are. There are all sorts of environmental, health and safety and other regulations that operators of industrial sites have to meet. So there's a huge opportunity there to go that bit further in terms of helping customers and supporting them. And that's, I think, going to be a big challenge, because as the sort of the challenge to be more environmentally sustainable it impacts business, then businesses are going to look to those people who can help them. So Scottish Water's got to ensure that it can deliver that, because if they don't, others will.
Okay, thanks. Last question is about bills in the coming period. I don't know if you're able to say whether you think that customer bills will have to rise during the next control period to maintain high levels of investment in the water and sewage networks.
Well, there is, in my view, no reason why bills would need to go up above the rate of inflation, unless the Scottish Government were to decide that it wanted a substantially larger investment programme than it's so far indicated, and was prepared to offer substantially less borrowing than it has to this point indicated that it would be prepared to lend. Last time we were very comfortable that Scottish Water would be able to live but be challenged with something like RPI -5. So about, what's that, about 1% out of 2.5%, let's say average inflation, less. So I think something that's not zero. Douglas explained why being zero might be very difficult, but certainly not the rate of inflation either. It's not the ugly political fudge necessarily of somewhere in the middle, but I think what we will want to see is ensure that there's an appropriate challenge there, but something that is achievable for the management.
Okay, thanks very much.
We move on to Jim.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, gentlemen. Can I ask you about competition in the non-domestic sector? Clearly, Business Stream remains the dominant player in the market for the provision of services to non-domestic properties. You, as a Commission, have a responsibility to foster competition within the market. What steps are you taking to do that?
To be clear, our duty is to facilitate entry into the market without doing detriment to the core business of Scottish Water. One of the things that perhaps characterises what we have done in Scotland versus what appears to be being discussed in England is that we have felt, and I think the government's felt, and there's been a consensus, I think, in Scotland, that there shouldn't be any losers as a result of there being competition. Some of what seems to be being discussed in England could involve some people losing out, and I think given the extent of the interconnection of social cross subsidies and all of that's just something that is to be avoided. So in terms of what we do to try and facilitate entry, we spend a lot of time explaining to both the Westminster Parliament, English water companies and anyone else how it is the Scottish market works, how it is it has delivered benefits, how many people are benefiting, the fact that it is a relatively low-cost market to participate in. And that seems to be having a fairly positive effect. Anglian Water, through an Osprey subsidiary, is an active participant in the market. There is a very small entity called Imera that's also very active. But over the last 6 months, we've issued licenses to Veolia, a major French company, United Utilities, which would be the third largest in England. Severn Trent would be the second largest in England. Thames would be the largest in England. And in addition to Wessex, who also had a license. So, Thames was they had a big article in the Times about 2.5-3 weeks ago, telling everyone that they were going to be very successful in Scotland. So we'll see how they do. It's easy to.
Do you have any concerns about the opening up of the market in England and the knock-on effect that that will have?
I have permanent concerns about that, because if I wasn't having concerns about that, I wouldn't be doing my job. One of the things that is, as I say, is critical is we are going to make sure that we work with whoever we need to work with to ensure that there are not going to be losers in Scotland. We've got a framework that's working well. We've got 70% of customers that are are paying less than they would otherwise have been paying because of the market structures that we've got. A huge amount of water is being saved through water efficiency advice and the associated carbon that's going with that, and customers are starting to get all these on-site services that I talked about. That's something that I'm not prepared to have risked by what I would regard as a less than successful reform south of the border.
Okay. We look forward to monitoring developments on that front. And
may come back to you and ask for some help at some point.
That was in my head, but it's helpful that you've put that on the record. Is the Commission doing anything to encourage businesses to consider switching as a viable option?
When the market first opened, we tried to make sure that there was an awareness level, that there was a market and there was choice there. There's been a number of surveys done by the Federation of Small Business which initially didn't show very high awareness at the point of market opening, but I think the last one of these I saw is probably a couple of years old now, but it was saying that just over half of all customers knew that they could switch. And I think it's getting higher than that, because we now do know that, as I said, approaching 70% have renegotiated the terms of their supply, either in price or enhanced services or whatever else, and so better off. So one assumes if they've done that, they know that there's a market there.
Thank you.
Alex.
The Scottish Government decided to set a lower borrowing limit for 2011-12. So what impact do you think this has had on Scottish Water's ability to achieve progress against its ministerial objectives and its OPA targets?
None, because, or at least the answer with hindsight is none, because they have clearly delivered, and they have delivered in terms of outputs at least as fast as they were expecting to deliver. Now, had they not been able to find some of the savings that they found, then maybe it would have been more challenging. But no doubt that's discussion between the Scottish Government and the officials and Scottish Water when that borrowing decision was arranged was taken in the light of that performance information. It's not something we're directly party to.
Scottish Water's costs increased significantly more than its revenue did during that same year. What impact did that have on these measurable targets?
Well, again, I think it's the same answer, that they've delivered at least as what they were expected to deliver. Had they had extra money, then maybe they would have delivered extra things, possible, but it's equally possible, and many in the regulatory game that we're in would say, well, actually, if a company's got a lot of surplus cash available to it, it feels less of an imperative to make efficiency savings elsewhere in his business. So keeping it just a little bit, feeling just a little bit short of cash, that's actually quite a good thing. You know, we call it internally a hard budget constraint. You know, we like to keep people feeling that, you know, they've just got to try that a little bit harder just to get to where they need to get to.
That position is maintained over the next 2 or 3 years. Is it still a good thing?
Well, as long as the level of borrowing is being set as Ronnie's three-legged stool, it's the second time I've heard him use that analogy. I think it's a very, very good analogy. You can cut back on borrowing, but if you cut back on borrowing, you have to cut back a bit on, you know, how many goodies you want as well. And you have to be prepared to accept the charges might be a bit higher. Now, what we've tried to do is make sure that we are very clear about what we regard as a sustainable level of financial strength, the financial health of Scottish Water as a business, over the medium to long term, which, you know, if the Scottish Government is successful in being able to be allowed to issue bonds for Scottish Water, then that would ensure that the cost of funding that came from those bonds would be very, very competitive indeed. Right? So we want to have a very strong financially Scottish Water. Clearly, as has been explained, one of the big benefits of for customers in Scotland is that there are not very large shareholder dividends being paid in the way that have been being paid by some of the companies in England. That's one of the reasons why we have got much lower bills than we otherwise would have had. So we need. There's a very tricky balance. But if you're asking in more general terms, is it quite a good idea that Scottish Water has to keep stretching to be certain of delivering its targets, then I'd say to you, yes, that's quite a good idea. That's ultimately what all businesses in competitive markets have to do. So all we're doing is replicating that same sort of pressure.
The final question I wanted to touch on is one you've really discussed already, and I just wanted to get you to repeat the answer so that I could ensure that I've got the right understanding. And that is, we've heard a bit from Scottish Water and from yourself about the fact that there has been a freeze in water bills, effectively, and that freeze is not sustainable. But do you agree with the timescale that Scottish Water presented in terms of beginning to ease water bills up, in cash terms at least? Or do you feel that they're doing enough to keep prices down?
I think in this particular period, if Scottish Water are outperforming such that, you know, on a permanent basis they can be spending of the order of 40-odd million a year, 40 to 50 million pounds a year, less than we had thought that they could generate and deliver everything else, then that's a pretty good outcome for customers. So, you know, yes, you have a choice. Do you take a freeze in customer charges, which is typically the sort of thing that gets very little mention but is always appreciated when we all do our budgets, or do you take a little bit less than inflation each year? And you know, they've opted to have the extended freeze rather than say inflation minus 1% or inflation minus 1.5% for the last 2 or 3 years of the programme. So I think yes, you know, an answer something around the rate of inflation. Does it need to be the full RPI? Well,
are you basically comfortable with the vision that Scottish Water set out earlier in terms of how they intend to move forward with water pricing?
Oh, I think an increase of around the rate of inflation, retail price inflation, over the next 2 years is okay. What it needs to be beyond that, what it will be in the next period, I don't think it will be a freeze, but I don't think it needs to be the full RPI either. And I think we can have all the things that ministers want, and I think we can have the sort of borrowing levels that ministers are prepared to give, and reasonable charges, but still have a very financially strong Scottish Water and further improvements for the environment and in customer service.
Thank you.
If I could explore the matter of the targets a bit more, how do you compare Scottish Water's OPA with the water companies in England and Wales, and how does that measure up?
I'll take that one. In the past, we've compared the OPA performance with companies for around about the last 10 years. And we are no longer able to do that because, as Scottish Water explained earlier, Ofwat has stopped using OPA. I was at Ofwat. I worked for Ofwat when the OPA was being developed, so I saw it being introduced down there. It's been very useful. And being able to benchmark performance in Scotland with companies as a whole in England and Wales, and with leaders in particular, has been extremely useful in driving up performance in Scotland. We've now reached the point where Scottish Water is knocking at the door of achieving leading performance. The last time we were able to look at that, which was 2010-11 financial year. Those are the latest figures that we can get hold of. So we are now looking towards what do we target Scottish Water in its performance on OPA without the ability to compare. And in that regard, we're getting the customer forum involved. Earlier this week, I had a meeting with the forum where I put it to them that there were improvements that could be, or extensions that could be made to the OPA scoring system. Would they be so good as to have a think about what they would like to see added into the OPA? How would they like the weightings that are in the OPA to reflect customer priorities in Scotland, so that we can now use OPA purely in a Scottish context to continue to target performance, albeit without the comparisons with England and Wales.
I don't really want you to go into how England and Wales measure performance of the water companies now, but is there another way that we could benchmark Scottish Water's performance internationally, either European or a more worldwide context? I mean, how do you do that kind of work?
Well, the secret of doing this is to get absolutely consistent information from the people you're benchmarking with, and that's easier said than done. It took actually several years to get a consistent body of data from the regulated companies in England and Wales to get the OPA set up. It took a lot of effort on our part and Scottish Water to collect precisely the same information in Scotland that would allow us to benchmark. Once you extend out of the water sector or out of the UK, it becomes extremely difficult to get consistent comparisons. And if you have to make do with comparisons that don't rely on consistent data, then the company that's being benchmarked has always got a get-out. Oh, we're not quite like that because there's something different in our numbers. So the bottom line is that a lot of that kind of external benchmarking just doesn't wash in the end.
I think one of the things that's probably worth emphasising in what John said is that what we are asking the forum to do is add to what is a successful way of measuring performance. If you replace wholesale one set of measures of performance with a new set of measures, as a regulator, you open yourself up to the opportunity for a company to play a little bit of a game with you. So they let performance slip in the things that you used to be measuring and start performing rather better in the things you're now measuring. So in order to avoid that sort of thing happening, you've got to keep measuring all the things you were measuring and add a few things on. And that's how you know that actually things are getting better over time. So that's why we're very keen not to lose this OPA measure and lose the progress, because we want to be able to track right back in 5 or 10 years' time. We want people to be able to look at that level of performance and say, how does that compare with what happened 5 years earlier, 10 years earlier with Scottish Water when it was first established? Because that's the only way we can keep a claim that Scottish Water is moving forward and doing its job. We don't want to be in a position of saying, well, is it better now than it was? And, that's a judgment call. We want to be absolutely confident that it is performing better.
So you're quite satisfied that even without this benchmarking with other companies, that you can sufficiently challenge Scottish Water to still keep raising its game?
Oh, I think so, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And just finally on the leakage reduction targets, are they sufficiently robust, do you think, given that Scottish Water has exceeded them every year, but there's still, as Margaret pointed out, a huge amount of water lost every day through leakage? Now, I know that, there's this kind of economic level that you reach, but, do you think there's still a lot of work to be done on this?
Well, can I say two things on this? The first thing is that all network industries have leakage of some description. The postal system is a network, right? Some mail gets lost in the system, right? Unfortunately, it just happens, right? The electricity industry, those like me who sort of gave up schoolboy physics as one of the earliest opportunities available, will still remember that the reason you have high voltage power lines is to reduce the amount of power that gets lost in the system. I was quite horrified when I found out that gas mains leak as well. So leakage in water for whatever reason has taken on a symbolism that's beyond anything else in other network industries. And I'm really not quite sure why that is, although we could probably all speculate, but that's just the case. Now, is the data as good as it can be? No, right? Because we will always be improving our understanding of the water mains that are underground. They are not readily observable. Do we think we are better today than we were a year ago or 3 years ago or 5 years ago? Absolutely. We know we're better. We know we've come a long way. Have we actually got to the point that we should be at? Well, that's maybe more of a question as to, how much more do we want to push this? The answer probably is yes, there's probably a fair ways that we could still go that would be sensible. And could be justifiable for various different reasons. But let's not take away from the fact that Scottish Water has made this progress and has done it through 2 very difficult winters, which typically would see companies missing leakage targets, as indeed they did down south, rather than meeting them. So I don't want to be the party pooper here. I think, can we go a bit further? Yes. Are we completely, perfect in our understanding? No. But we should give credit where credit's due. They have brought leakage down by nearly 50%.
Okay, anyone else got any further questions? No, gentlemen, thank you very much for your evidence today. Before I suspend the meeting, before we go into private session, I think we should put on record that this is Lauren Spavin-Dawn's last meeting with this committee. She's moving to the European Committee, so thank you for all the work you do in terms of getting the witnesses here and everything, Lauren, and the rest that you do behind the scenes. Thanks very much, and wish you all the best in the new committee. Thank you very much. Suspend till we move into private session.